What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. It's that time of the weekend, everybody's favorite segment, the MLB Power Rankings. Guys, we just passed over 1,000 subs a little over a week ago. We did the 1,000 sub giveaway for the hat. If you want to be a part of giveaways in the future, you have to make sure you are a subscriber and probably should be watching the majority of the videos because I do give you hints throughout for that. If you want to know if you are the winner, I let a comment go on that as well as did the draw in the video. So go back and check that out to see if you were the winner. Otherwise, guys, I'm just going to jump into it. Subscribers, you know what to do. You know how this goes down, but we go 30-1. Top row, obviously the best teams. Bottom row, the teams that are pretty much out of it. We do film this video right before the Sunday night game. Tonight, it is the Cardinals versus the Cubs. So unfortunately, those two teams only had one game so far this weekend, but we're going to talk about it all. We're going to jump right into it, and finding their way back home, we have the Chicago White Sox 1-2 against Toronto. They did manage to steal one against the Jays, but we're going to talk about that in a second. And then getting swept by the Baltimore Orioles. I did do a short this week that one of the games over in that Baltimore series ended kind of sketchy, but I don't know if they would have ever came back and won that game. Either way, they kind of got blown out. They gave up a ton of runs this week. I didn't add it up, but it feels like it was close to 50 runs. I know it wasn't that, but they gave up a lot of runs this week. Chicago seems to be pretty much cemented back in the bottom. All the other teams that have flirted with the bottom at least have had some winning streaks as of late. We saw Chicago have a couple winning series there over April and May, but I think the run differential is starting to catch up to them, and it was a pretty ugly week for them with only the one win. Number 29, I got the Colorado Rockies. They went 1-2 against Oakland, another team that's in this bottom row. They did manage to beat last week's number one, the Philadelphia Phillies, in a weekend series this weekend, 2-1. However, I don't really hold too much weight all the time when the Rockies are winning games at home. I know that's kind of unfair because it's supposed to be a home field advantage, but when teams go to Coors, there's kind of shenanigans going on. So just a 2-game series win there, not holding a lot of weight in that one situation. However, if the Rockies can continue to make this a habit, which they haven't been able to so far this season, they might start to make some headway because I think it's starting to be a little bit up for grabs in this bottom row. Number 28, having peaked a couple of weeks ago, they went 2-1 against these same Rockies. And when these two teams played each other, there were some wild games, including a 10-9 win by the A's. So it was two bottom dwellers just going shot for shot with each other. And the A's had moved them up to, I think 22 is where they peaked maybe close to a month ago. But since then, they've had one of the most amount of losses in the entire MLB. The division that seemed like maybe they had a shot. We all knew they didn't really have a shot, but it felt like they might be in there. It seems to be falling out to the wayside at this point. So they lose to Houston as well this weekend. They do manage to pick up one win against them, a team that had struggled all season long, but they're starting to get a little hot. So the A's clearly, I think, are back to being the bottom dwellers in that division. Number 27, moving up a couple of spots. I had to give them some credit. They had a winning week, and they played some pretty, not like amazing opponents. They played Milwaukee earlier in the week. They won that series. They really kept the bats of Milwaukee down. The pitching seems to be the biggest strong point for Miami right now. They also go into this weekend and win again 2-1 against Arizona. Again, National League champions last year, so got to give a little bit of credit there. But at the same time, they're having trouble scoring runs, and I don't think they're going to have what it takes to really make headway in this division whatsoever. We know the pitching has always been a strong point for Miami, and they even have some pitchers on the DL so far this season and not going to get them back. They're out of the playoff race, but I think out of all these teams, the future looks bright when you're looking at Miami compared to the other ones, at least so far. Number 26, I do have the LA Angels. They started the week off beating up on the division rival Houston Astros, winning that series. Pretty exciting. Some of those games that they snuck out, 1-run game, 2-run game, they were tight, and they were scoring some offense. Even without Trout in there, they are putting up runs. However, then they go up against one of the hottest teams in the MLB, in the Cleveland Guardians, and they get swept over the weekend here. Put up a fight, 5-4 game today. It was really close, but they just couldn't edge it out. And I think we're really seeing the best of the Angels these past few weeks. I didn't really think with Trout going down that they'd be able to be too competitive. Their run differential, really not great at all, but they have at least been stealing some wins here and there. There hasn't been any crazy losing streaks for the Angels. They're at least being competitive day in and day out, so I do give a lot of credit for that. To me, I was kind of counting them out, but they still are kind of hanging around. Unlike this team, they just keep slipping. Number 25, I do have the New York Mets. They almost went 0 for 6 this week, starting the week going 0 for 3 against Cleveland. They were 0 2 against San Francisco over the weekend, and then we saw a bottom of the ninth walk-off comeback against the San Francisco Giants. But it wasn't enough to keep them out of the bottom row, I think, when we started looking at the entire course of the MLB. This spot for me has been one that I've been kind of debating on who it should be, and I think the Mets made a case that it can't be anyone really else but them. The Mets are arguably have the most losses since the mid of April or something like that, and they're in a division where they're barely ahead of the Marlins at this point, and it's a division where they should be able to be somewhat competitive against the bottom of their division, and they just haven't been able to do it. There was lists going around of their signings this past 5 years and how they've just been atrocious signings. It's really starting to catch up to the Mets. I don't know what their future is really going to look like. They're definitely in that rebuild kind of situation. Speaking of potential rebuilds, we have number 24, and I think I was talking about this to myself, my family, and some people on the Discord. This might be the absolute lowest point. It's not even, it might be, it definitely is the lowest point the Blue Jays have been on this power ranking since we started it in 2019. So number 24, pretty scary. There was talks, rumors going around that if they don't straighten this ship out, that Vlad's going to be shipped out. Bo Bichette could be very well on the chopping block. Both of them have contracts going into next year, but if they're not going to sort it out this year, might as well start the rebuild for Toronto right now. Going 2-1 against the White Sox, you had to be a little excited. They did lose one game against the White Sox early, and then they bounced back and managed to win the rubber match. So there was concern there, and of course the offense at times has been non-existent. Then we come into this 4-game set with the Tigers, a team that has been middle of the pack pretty much the entire season on this power rankings, and they go down and win 1 out of the 4 games, which just sets me back to be like, I was debating putting them in the bottom row, but the Mets talked me out of it, and that's just complete honesty. Today was just a story of what it's been like being a Jays fan and watching them so far this season, losing 14-11. Their offense finally putting up double digits, and then their pitching can't get it done. They came back from multiple 5-run deficits and still blow the game. Jays just can't seem to figure it out, and that is rightfully why they're number 24. Number 23, I do have the Washington Nationals. 1-2 against Minnesota, 2-1 against Seattle. Washington's been like pretty steady, almost floating around 500 majority of the season. They've even beaten the Jays. That's part of the reason why I had them ahead of it. But when I started looking at teams ahead of them, I don't know in the long term if Washington is going to be able to keep picking up the wins like the way they have. If they keep playing 500 baseball, they'll of course slowly go up because other teams will not be. But at this time, I think overall, number 23 makes a lot of sense. Number 22, we do have the Cincinnati Reds 3-0 against the Dodgers over this weekend. I think that is probably so far the highlight of the Cincinnati Reds season. The low point being they were in the bottom row only a couple of weeks ago. They couldn't seem to get any offense going whatsoever, but in this series with the Dodgers, a lot of good things were happening. And then earlier in the week, they did manage to take 1 game out of San Diego as well for an overall 4-2 week against arguably the 2 best teams in the National League West. So a lot of credit for Cincinnati this week. Ellie De La Cruz continues to steal massive amounts of bases, and that is being a massive impact. At least if he's on your fantasy team, you're probably really excited about that. We're starting to look at teams here when we're talking even 23, 24, arguably. These teams are technically probably still within easily striking distance of getting back into the playoff hunt. And all it takes, 10-game win streak. Get it going. Number 21, a team, speaking of team of streaking, they went 4-0 this week. Tough little situation. They only played the 1 game so far against the Cubs. Of course, I already talked about. They're playing the Sunday Nighter tonight. but they also sweep the Baltimore Orioles, breaking the Orioles' almost 1 year long record of never being swept. I think it was over a year, actually. The Cardinals, I talked about it last week a little bit more in depth. They were the one team ready for a breakout. They were in the bottom row for the past month, and they were ready for a breakout. And honestly, if they keep on this winning streak, they could be up here by next week. They've been playing very well. The pitching is starting to come together, and they're just a hot team. And when you get hot in baseball, you start making noise. Number 20. I do have the San Francisco Giants. A lot of people might disagree with this. 2-1 against Pittsburgh, 2-1 against the Mets. But their offense has been very lackluster for the majority of the season so far. That run differential-wise, they're not really great when you start comparing them to teams in the middle of the pack. Sure, they're basically 500 on the season, and they're in there in that playoff race. I think they might even be second in the division. I can't know for sure off the top of my head. But when I look at the grand scheme of things, I just don't see them being able to consistently get winning weeks like the way they did this week. They beat Pittsburgh. That's a huge bonus, a team that they're probably going to be fighting down the stretch for those last wild card spots if it gets to that. And the Mets game, wanted to see them sweep it. If they took the sweep from the Mets, it might have been a little more excited, but that does bring concern when you can't hold a 3-run lead like they were. A lot of pain there. Number 19, I just can't keep this team up any longer. They just slowly but surely keep falling down the list. It was a 1-5 week for Texas. Week after week, I had talked about it. They were floating around 500. They were struggling, but it made sense. They were dealing with so many injuries, but now it's starting to, the rest of the teams are maybe starting to get in mid-season form, whereas Texas, they have a lot of injuries really hold them back, especially in the pitching department, and it's really starting to catch up with them. We saw it this week, getting swept by Philadelphia earlier in the week, going 1-2 against Minnesota Twins, a team that has been very streaky, but also a team that is likely going to be fighting for wild card playoff spots with Texas. Texas is just slowly falling behind, and even though they're in a division with two teams that are below them, those teams I think will be able to compete with them, at least this level of Texas that we're seeing right now. So number 19, and possibly falling because we have some hot teams right behind them, and we're one Blue Jay streak away from that being a way difference. Next up, I do have the Arizona Diamondbacks, and just a 500 week for them. So I think they're in the exact same spot as last week. They they beat the Dodgers earlier in the week, 2-1, and they started the Dodgers on their losing streak. We'll get to that in a minute. And then they lose to Miami over the weekend. And Miami, while they had a winning week and they're starting to really shut them down, it shows that if the pitching isn't going for Arizona and the offense isn't going at the same time, they're in a lot of trouble. Arizona, they really got set apart last year by their pitching, and so far this season it hasn't been to the same caliber that we have gotten used to over the past year. At the same time, when you're getting shut down like they did against Miami this weekend, it's not going to bode well and you're going to lose series, but 500, you're still in it and they're still going strong. I still have big aspirations and I'm not counting them out. They're right there in the middle. Number 17, I do have the Pittsburgh Pirates. 1-2 against San Fran. I kind of already touched on that series. But they go this weekend and bounce back, and I like to see it 2-1 against Atlanta Braves. Atlanta's been one of those teams that's somewhat been struggling, but Pirates are one of those teams that at this point, normally in the season, they've had a good start, and it's been kind of the same story this year. Then they fall, and they fall, and they fall. Whereas this season so far, they fell, and now they're starting to fight their way back up. Maybe it has a little bit to do with the excitement of Paul Skeens coming in, although he's had 2 great starts where they got losses in. He didn't get the loss, but they ended up blowing those games. If they can sort that kind of problem out, I do believe they're going to be able to compete, especially in this division. This division is not by any means over, and with all the games you're going to have playing up against division opponents in the near future here, I think the Pirates have a leeway to even move further up the board. Number 16, one of the struggling teams this week, 0-3 against Boston, 1-2 against Kansas City. And while it's not the greatest of week 1 and 5 on the week, Tampa Bay did have a little bit of a streak going the past couple of weeks. Now they're starting to see themselves play against teams that they would have to be able to beat should they want to see themselves in the playoffs, and they're falling a little bit short. I'm not going to hold too much into it. It's 1 week, and we've seen Kansas City. They've been elite so far this season. Tampa Bay managed to steal one on Sunday today to avoid that sweep, avoid a weak sweep, so they at least stopped it here. What they're going to do next week, that's going to be big importance, because these two teams I talked about, they're on the hunt, and we got lots of teams on the hunt right now, and eventually I'm going to have a scapegoat to fall down if these teams keep on winning, and Tampa Bay is starting to fit that mold a little bit. Number 15, we got the Detroit Tigers. Big bounce back this weekend against Toronto. The offense really popping off, and even in the one game where they win 2-1, they have a great pitching from Reese Olson, and so that's super exciting. Some of the pitching on Detroit that I didn't suspect was going to be there has been there, so they're pretty much been the definition of steady as she goes. It seems like they've been right here in this middling part for a majority of the past month, if not longer. And they bounced back good because they got swept by a division foe, the Cleveland Guardians, earlier in the week. And that's a team that they wanted to chase. They want to be able to compete for this division right now. And at this point, I don't know if the Royals or the Guardians are really within reach, but they're trying to float along at least to be in the playoff wildcard race. Next up, I do have number 14, San Diego Padres, 2-1 against Cincinnati. 1-2 against the Yankees, so they avoid the sweep against the Yankees today. Super good for them. They've been one of those teams I get them wrong so often. Every time I think they're going to take a step forward and start being competitive, we see them fall back. The pitching some days is just absolutely elite, and then other days they're getting blown up. And then same with the bats. Some days they're slam Diego all over again, and then the next day they're putting up 1 run. So it's hard to figure them out. I think if they can somehow get it all together, they're going to be a top 10 team, but they haven't been able to show that yet. And of course, they're below 500 at this point. At one point or another, I'm going to have to give in that their record is true, and they're going to maybe start falling as some of these other teams start getting more and more above 500. Number 13, I have the Minnesota Twins, 2-1 against Washington, 2-1 against Texas. So we saw them, I think, went on like a 6 or 7 game losing streak after such a massive winning streak about a month ago. So they've been probably the most streaky team so far this season. So it's been nice to see them rebound this week, beating 2 teams that are below them somewhat significantly in the power rankings. And if they want to keep in this division fight, they got to beat those series, and they did do that. They didn't sweep any of them. They took 2 games to 1, but again, a win is a win. And Minnesota Twins got to stick around right here on the edge of the top 2 rows. Number 12, I got the Boston Red Sox. I gave them a lot of credit and bounced back after somewhat of a little shaky past couple of weeks with sweeping Tampa. Pretty much, to me, defined that they are number 3 in this division. I had a Tampa, had a Toronto. They have yet to play Toronto, but just based on watching these 2 teams over the course of the season so far, they've kind of defined themselves as the solid number 3 in this division. They went 1-2 against Milwaukee. It is what it is, and it's a team that's ahead of them and has been steadily ahead of them this whole season, so it doesn't come as a major surprise. End of the day, it's a winning week for them, and they're moving on to start playing some important division games coming up. Number 11, this is probably going to be the most controversial one on the board because they're below 500, and I have them nearly in the top 10. They went 1-2 against the Angels. A little bit rough, but they bounced back, and 2-1 against the A's. So a 500 week against 2 bottom rows teams might not be exactly what they should be doing to be in the spot. But to me, they have the team, and we've seen it over the past 4 weeks or so. They've been one of the best teams in the MLB record-wise, run-wise, etc. And I do want to give them a chance because they are having a 4-game set starting tomorrow against the Seattle Mariners, which will play a big part of where they are going to be sitting next week. They'll either be right here and maybe a little bit up, or they're going to start falling back into the thick of the pack that I keep talking about. The other team they're up against is the Minnesota Twins. So this is kind of my way of predicting that in that series next weekend that I do give the Astros a slight edge. Next up, I do have the Chicago Cubs, 1-2 against Atlanta, and then 0-1 against the Cardinals. So really only 4 games this week. I think I dropped them a couple of spots, mainly because the other teams just seem to be more steadily good lately. But I didn't put too much into the Cubs this week just because 4 games is really hard to do too much about it. But to lose the series earlier in the week in Atlanta, a team that has also been somewhat struggling and falling down the ranks slowly, does kind of impact the Cubs. Number 9, I do have those Seattle Mariners, 2-2 against the Yankees, 1-2 against Washington. Just a sub 500 week, but for them to split the series with the Yankees, I gave a lot of credit to. A 4-game set with the Yankees, never going to be easy. We saw Houston get swept by them earlier in the year. Kind of setting up a matchup here between these guys when they're playing 4 games against each other this week. I'm pretty excited. I think this is going to be the biggest series to watch this week. And then to follow up the Yankees with a little bit of a letdown against a Washington team, losing 2 of the 3. I'm not going to put too much weight into it. The pitching on Seattle has been pretty electric. And honestly, Brian Wu has just surprised me completely. I'm surprised he has the stats he does. But one thing that does concern me with the Mariners is this offense. Batting averages are slightly down. The runs aren't quite there. But I think some of that sometimes has to do with where they are playing. Number 8, I do have the Milwaukee Brewers, 1-2 against Miami, 2-1 against Boston, 500 week. Kind of steady as she goes. Most of these teams that I just talked about, I think almost all of them is pretty much a 500 week for most teams. We're going to only talk about a couple of teams that had a slightly better than that. But for the most part, it's a pretty even week for most teams. And you kind of had to see how teams are streaking, how they're playing against the tougher opponents, and et cetera. So Milwaukee didn't really do much to really change my mind on where they're sitting. They're still very much in the thick of things with the Cubs. They do play the Cubs this week coming up, and that's going to be a big part of what this division is going to start to shape up for going forward. Next up, falling out of the bottom row, or the top row, I should say, Atlanta, 2-1 against the Cubs, 1-2 against Pittsburgh. So 500 against the National League Central this week. 2 teams that are in the thick of it. The big story, I think, coming out today was that Acuna left the game with a hurt knee of some sort. Will that be impactful going forward? Probably, if he doesn't get back in the lineup relatively soon. We've seen some pretty dangerous injuries to this Braves team already, with Kyle Wright, I believe, going down earlier this year, and we have Spencer Strider as well. So it's been a little bit of injuries. If we're going to see the same team that we saw competing in the playoffs last year, not so much right now. So they are falling down. They've been a little bit of downward trend over the past number of weeks, and that did knock them out of the top row, because some of these other teams are just upward trending, and I can't stop them. 3-0 against Detroit, 2-1 against Tampa. They went on an 8-game winning streak coming into their loss finally today. The Royals' rotation has been super steady. Their young guys and their offense has just been electric. It's some of the most runs coming out of Kauffman Stadium, which you don't usually see very often. The Royals have made it to the top row with their division rival. We got the Cleveland Guardians, 3-0 against the Mets, 3-0 against the Angels for a 6-0 week. It's without a doubt, I was doubting them very early in the season. A couple of weeks in, I was probably the most hate I was getting was where I was ranking the Guardians. It took me a while to be sold on them, but now we're seeing their offense. The run differential has been amazing. They're on a 9-game winning streak right now, and that's on top of all the other winning streaks they've already had this season. And I don't think you can argue too much that they deserve a top 5 spot right now. Some people might say even further, because number 4 is currently on a 5-game losing streak. And I'm not going to hold a 5-game losing streak. I should hold it a little bit more, but I want to see one more week of these two teams. How are they going to bounce into this following week? Whereas the Dodgers, they lost to Cincinnati, a big sweep there. A little bit stumbling. We're seeing a lot of struggling with the Dodgers right now, and it could be the same kind of story that we're talking about with Atlanta if they keep kind of doing this. It's only a matter of time before these two teams are getting past them, whereas these other 3 teams have already proven to get past them. And the Dodgers losing to Arizona as well. You would expect that, given where the records are in the rest of this National League West, that the Dodgers would have been running away with it right now, but they're sitting at basically 600, whereas the rest of the teams are like 500. So they're not really getting the gap that you would expect with the struggling of Arizona and San Diego. So number 4, they have the team. I don't know if the depth is getting there and if that's being part of the problem with them right now, but we'll see if they can even hold on to number 4. Number 3, I have the New York Yankees, 2-2 against Seattle, 2-1 against the Padres, a little bit over 500, and their offense, Judge is definitely back. Soto batting over 300. He's been a monster, but he's come out and said he's definitely going to test free agency. I don't think there's any surprise there. And I got them at number 3. They're solid. Arguably could be anywhere in the top 3. They could be number ones. They're probably number 1 on some people's lists. But for me, the biggest difference right now is I do have number 2. Do have the Baltimore Orioles. The biggest difference between these two is they've played once and Orioles won that series. I know it was a couple of weeks ago now. We've seen some struggles from Baltimore in their bullpen over the past month, or if not longer, but at the same time, we do see struggles from the Yankees at the same time in different areas. So they're going to play each other again soon. One of these teams might have a little bit of a struggle, or one of these teams might show me that they deserve to be number 2 no matter what. But right now, I have them basically even. So when that happens, the tiebreaker does go to that kind of situation of the Orioles having won. Orioles got off to a rough start. They had their streak broken of not being swept by the Cardinals. I did warn that it might happen, the Cardinals being the hottest team that I talked about last week, and they moved the most up this board out of anyone. And then they do like the way they responded this weekend, going 4 wins against the Chicago White Sox. Sure, last place, but a team like, if you're going to be a top 3 team, you have to bounce back in situations like that. Teams are going to get swept. You can't go very long without being swept. The Orioles did a year, but that is very rare for that to happen. So I'm going to keep them at number 2, and that remains us at number 1. I do have the Philadelphia Phillies for back-to-back weeks, but they're holding on, right? They're going to have some tough weeks coming up. They're finally going to start being tested against some teams that have higher winning records. We haven't seen a whole lot of them go against that. Still only playing 6 games against teams with winning records. Sure, they go 3-0 against Texas, but when they're playing Texas this week, Texas is again below 500, so that does not add to that total. And then they lose to the Rockies over the weekend, and I talked about it when I was talking about the Rockies. It's at Coors, so I'm not going to hold too much about it. Some teams come into Coors, they've been traveling, they go to an environment where the ball is hit a little different, that whole atmosphere is different, so they still managed to take one on the road, so a little bit of excitement there. But again, this has probably been the most exciting season when it comes to power rankings. We're close to having 5 different teams be at number 1 throughout the year already. And who knows, one of these 2 teams, I think, are hungry. They are hungry to get into that number 1 spot, and do not count them out. We could see 6, 7 different teams at number 1 by the end of the season. That would be insane. Let me know what you guys think. Where would you guys rank some of these teams? Where am I just completely out to lunch? I appreciate all the comments that you guys throw into the bottom there. Smash that like button. If we get to 50 likes or something like that, maybe I'll do a couple videos this week breaking down some division races, etc. That's kind of what I've been focusing on, and that's, I think, what I'm going to be most excited to talk about. So let me know what you guys think, and we'll see you for that next video.